This is You and Yours, introduced by Derek Cooper. Hello. Mrs. Nina Gillings from Ipswich had a nasty experience recently with a Doorstep salesman. He said that he'd taken the job in order to travel around the world.
He talked continually in such a fast, loud and almost unintelligible manner that I could only concentrate on what he was saying and didn't have time to think about the content of his words. He wouldn't tell me who was sponsoring him, but could only say that he had to collect some 20,000 points in order to go to his next country and to qualify for some cash prize. And if I ordered any magazines from his list, the points would be added to his total. When I insisted upon knowing who was backing him, he replied a group of businessmen. The incessant flow of this boy's sales patter was a complete brainwash. Before I knew what was happening, I was paying him £2.30 for a publication and promising to send the remaining £1 balance to his backers within 7 days. He wasn't allowed to accept the full cost, he said. Incidentally, I at no time asked him into the house. This all took place on the doorstep. After he'd gone, I stood in the hall, trembling all over and perspiring freely. The effect of silence after that noise had ceased was utter relief. It was only then did my poor brain take it all in, and I realised I'd been fooled by a confidence trickster. I felt like crying. Within a few minutes, my next-door neighbour telephoned to say she'd just had a salesman at the door, and she was feeling so shaken, would I go round? I did. And we spent the next quarter of an hour ringing all our friends to warn them of this man's presence in the village.
Well, we seem to have started quite a string of complaints about doorstep salesmen. That was only one of several letters we received on the subject today. I'll give you one guess at the subject which occupies more of our time and thought than anything else. The answer, apparently, is food. What's more, did you know that man is the one animal who has learned to eat anything in order to survive? And that's why we're called omnivores. Omnivores is the title of a book published today which looks at the role man's eating habits have played in his evolution. The author is Dr. Lyle Watson, and he came to the studio just before the program began. I think one of the things that emerges from the book is that you really have a theory that in our buying of food and cooking it, we are really behaving in much the same way as primitive man. Is this right?
Yes, I think that's so. In our present-day feeding behaviour, we show the heritage of all our past feeding behaviours. For 30 million years, we were scavengers. Today, we still have this in us. We still need to search for food. And I think that the supermarket caters for this need beautifully. You have to go into a large rambling place with a number of different things, and you have to find what you want. You do it yourself, self-service, self-scavenging. Often it's hard to find the things you need, and this is, I think, very satisfying for many people, because they hang around in supermarkets long after they've found the things they came to buy. And the supermarkets have had to put in restrooms and food counters where people can rest in between their scavenging. I think if the supermarket manager is on his toes, one of the things he does is to hide the food deliberately. When he sees people are finding their way to the bread counter quickly, he moves it somewhere else, and they have to start the scavenging all over again. And far from making them angry, this seems to satisfy people, satisfy an inbuilt need to search for food, an old need.
That's very interesting, but why, if man has this inbuilt need to go out and scavenge for food, why doesn't he go out and scavenge? Because if you go into a supermarket, you'll find it's the women who are scavenging.
Well, the women were the food collectors originally. The man was the hunter. That came a little later. Originally, they were both scavengers, but it was the women who did most of the collecting of the berries, the roots, the insects and things on which they lived. So today that's still her role, and it's she who finds most satisfaction in this kind of modern version of the scavenging. Men, being hunters, can no longer hunt today, but as you know, they find satisfaction in pseudo-hunting activities like going out to work and making a kill in the city and modern types of pseudo-hunting activity.
How does the choice of the things we buy stem from primitive urges then?
Well, you'll see in a supermarket that none of the food areas are blue in colour. I think this is important because when we were scavengers and collectors of fruits and nuts and things, we looked for the ripest ones, and they were always reds and yellows and warm brown in colour. And so food today is still packaged in these colours. It's very rare you'll find food packaged in a bright blue. If you see an area of bright blue in a supermarket, you know it's the detergent counter, not something edible at all. There are very few blue foods. A sweet manufacturer will not produce a blue one because he knows it doesn't sell.
What about courtship patterns? Does any of this survive there?
Yes, I think it does. Food has more than a nutritional value to us. It has social values. And when a man is interested in a woman, the thing he does is ask her out to dinner. He doesn't necessarily ask her out to come and see his etchings first. First of all, it's food. He feeds her. Courtship feeding is the first stage. And even if she isn't hungry, she's glad to accept the meal because it is a social gesture, and she sees it as such.
How do you think patterns are going to change in Western society in the next decade or so?
My fear is that we're becoming too specialized in our feeding habits. We eat the same kinds of food, prepared in the same kinds of ways. Wherever you go in the world, there's what's called international cuisine, which is the same old stodge prepared in the same horrible ways. The danger in this is that we are becoming too specialized. We're losing the old variety which life used to have. And whenever you look at a specialization in any behavior pattern, in any species, it inevitably leads to an evolutionary cul-de-sac. It's a dead end. Become too good at one particular thing and you lose the ability to adapt to changing circumstances when these changes occur. And this is the whole process of evolution. It's a dynamic process. Changes are taking place all the time and will continue to take place with increasing rapidity. And because food is such an important part of our lives, I think it's very, very important to us as animals to retain the variety in the way we search for food and in the foods which we choose to eat.
So the people whom are often dismissed as food faddists or cranks who want to go back and eat simple, wholesome food may not be as stupid as some people make them sound.
Not at all, because far from being a specialized diet, vegetarianism today tends to be quite a varied diet. When you cut out meat, which is the old staple, you choose perhaps 20 different things to take its place. And so they are becoming really more omnivorous, more anything eaters than the strict carnivores.
Omnivores is published today by the Souvenir Press, and the author, to whom I've just been speaking, is Dr. Lyle Watson. And now here's Lucille Hall. In this fourth and final part of her series on homes for older people, she sees what life is like in a home.
I spoke first to Miss Toms, matron of a large local authority home in London. I asked her about life in her home.
Well, the day begins about 7 o'clock. The night nurse goes round and they have an early morning cup of tea. A lot of them wake quite early, so this is a jolly good event to them, you know, the cup of tea. Then they have breakfast at 8:15. This consists of porridge, cornflakes, always a cooked breakfast, maybe scrambled eggs, poached eggs, bacon and fried bread, bacon and fried potatoes, this sort of thing, you know.
Would there be a choice?
No, not a choice, other than that they can choose between the cornflakes and the porridge, you know.
What happens next?
Then after that, they mostly go to the sitting rooms, either start reading the newspaper or any books or magazines that they have. The more active residents go out shopping. And what is quite a good thing, they do shop for the other residents who are not able to do this. So they go around getting the lists from various people, you know.
Now we've presumably got to lunchtime. What sort of thing might they have for lunch?
Well, anything. On a Friday, obviously, we have fish, you know, either steamed fish or fried fish. We have days when we have lamb or pork, curries, and chicken casseroles or roast chicken, this sort of thing.
And would you have?
And they always have soup to begin with. Then there's sort of lamb course, and a sweet to follow, and a cup of tea to follow that, you know.
And I suppose in the afternoons many of them probably take naps, do they?
Oh yes, quite a lot go to the bed and, you know, have a snooze, and then come down again at tea time, which is a high tea at 4:30.
What sort of thing do they get for tea?
Oh, spaghetti bolognese, anything that, you know, fairly light, fish cakes, might have poached eggs on toast if they haven't had it that week, and varying things like that.
And would they have anything else to eat before they go to bed?
Oh yes, about 7 o'clock they have a drink, it may be coffee or a milk drink, and with that they can have sandwiches, cake or biscuits, just what they feel like.
This all seems to be fairly typical, but there are variations, of course. For instance, in a small voluntary home,
Well, some get up very early, but they can please themselves as long as they're in the dining room for, say, 8:45, breakfast. Some don't come to the dining room. If they don't want to, they don't come. We've only 2 breakfasts in bed at the moment. But some can, they can make their own. Some prefer a cup of coffee. Or one lady especially, she likes just to drink a coffee in the morning. Or she just has it in her own time, so she doesn't come to the dining room for breakfast, but she doesn't want to cook breakfast.
And in a private home?
They have breakfast in bed, or an early morning cup of tea if they want it. Breakfast is around 8.
What sort of things would they have for breakfast?
They can have more or less what they like for breakfast. Most don't have a big breakfast, though. Then they get up leisurely in their own time, and they have coffee at 10:30.
Do they have coffee in their own rooms or in the sitting room?
No, they have it in their own rooms, because most of them aren't down by that time. They're either visiting each other or listening to the radio or reading. Some take a long time to get dressed.
How do people spend their time, I wondered? Much like other people at home, it seems. They read, listen to the radio, visit the local. The women often knit or sew or make toys. Craft tutors visit some homes regularly. There are film shows and coach outings, visitors to be entertained. If you thought going into a home would mean having to spend the rest of your days sitting silently staring into space, waiting for the next meal, you'd be wrong. Indeed, people who before may not have bothered now get regular meals and warmth and take their medicines regularly and often feel fitter and more able to take an interest in life than they did before. The secretary of a London voluntary home told me how residents there spent their time.
We have colour television, and they watch that a great deal. We have a black and white set down in the other lounge, which comes through the wireless for the bedridden. They use that a great deal. They read a lot, especially the big print books which we get from the City of Westminster Library, and they natter a lot. They also, of course, have their naps in the afternoon. Those who are able and fit go out for walks, which we encourage, but of course a great many of them cannot go out anymore. But in the summer we have a very nice garden and they go out there. They spend a lot of time out there and they enjoy it too. In the summer some of them go to the City of Westminster homes at either Bexhill or Broadstairs for a week, and in the winter they go out to parties and so forth, and we have parties here over Christmas, of course, and Easter, and they have a mild sort of party on their birthdays. The cook always makes them special cake.
Would residents be expected to help with the work of the home? Did they have at least to make their own beds?
Yes.
Do they do anything else?
No. One or two do help with washing up and so on, but that's purely voluntary, and some help getting the bread and butter ready. And we do encourage that because it gives them something to do, some little object in life, and we do make an acknowledgement of it.
Not everyone I spoke to was content. Some find it harder to adjust to the inevitable limitations of growing old. One 92-year-old, asked how he felt about making the change from living on his own to living in a home, said,
Rotten. So you've got to have what they give you. You can't have what you fancy.
Yes.
That's the worst part. So I'll go tomorrow if I had the chance. Have a place on my own. It's so quiet here, there's nothing doing.
It's not bad for 92, but others didn't agree.
I found it a big change after my big rooms, you see. This little tiny room, I thought I could never settle in this, but I settled in immediately. And I wouldn't give it up for anything.
It's very nice. It's better than being on your own. It was, at times you got lonely, you just had the four walls, and at least I don't have to go out for meals. And I found it a lot better.
I think it's far better than living by yourself. Everything is taken care of for you. You really haven't any worries. It's just, I think it's more like home, but there is someone always there.
For many, the big disadvantage was having to share a bedroom.
Since my teens, I've always had a room to myself.
How big a change did you find that, having to share a room?
Terrible change.
I did. We all do.
Oh,
now that is the bugbear.
I thought I should never get used to it.
How many do you share with?
I share a room of 5.
And how many do you share with?
1.
Well, if I could have a bedroom to myself, or with sharing it with only 1, I should be happier. But it's a thing that you've just got to get used to the idea of and live with. And the only thing is you've got to learn to give and take, and not enforce your will just because you've always had your own way and your own room.
One of these ladies told me she was slightly deaf, which she'd always considered a hardship, but was now rather grateful for. Did she have any advice for others?
You should find out different things from within them, whether they are prepared to live with other people who up to that moment are perfect strangers. You see, I hadn't met anybody in this home until I came to live here.
One man I met in a private home had worked out for himself a whole new philosophy.
They must realise they're going into a new life, a different kind of life in all probability to what they've had before. But they mustn't keep thinking about the life they've left and regretting it, because you can't turn the clock back and live it all over again. Therefore, they must try to take as much interest as possible in their surroundings and regard it as an experience from which undoubtedly they can learn something of interest. They'll learn probably a good deal about a certain kind of their fellow creatures that they haven't met before, for instance, you see. And in other words, you must realise that the past is gone. You may think about it, but you can't bring it back, whatever you... So you had better make the best of the future.
Giving up your own home is a very big decision to make, one not to be made lightly or in the immediate despair after a bereavement. Consider the alternatives. With more help from the local authority, Meals on Wheels, a home help to do the cleaning, would you be able to stay in your own home? If you're lonely, is there a day centre or a club you could visit? Would you be better off in what's called sheltered housing, where you have your own room but there's someone on hand for emergencies? If you do decide that a home is the right answer for you, take time to choose. Obviously, some homes are better than others, but I hope we've shown that there are good homes and that people in them are often very contented.
Well, I played with the idea and fought against giving up my home for 2 years, but in the end I had to. It just got too much for me. I'm really, when I tell you, I wish I'd done it 2 years ago. Yes.
You lay in bed of a night and think to yourself, well, thank God, I wish everybody, I say my prayers, wish everybody in old people's home was as happy as I am.
And that concludes our series on homes for the elderly. If you're interested in getting some of the details mentioned in Lucille Hall's earlier programmes, we've prepared a special information sheet which we can send you, but only if you let us have a stamped addressed envelope. You might also be interested in 2 helpful publications on the subject: Arrangements for Old Age, published by the Consumers Association for 50p, and 70+, a handbook on easier living for the elderly, published by the BBC, price 30p. And now, The Children on the Hill, which is the title of a book by Michael Deakin, published today. The children are all extremely clever, and the hill is above a mining town in Wales. Perhaps even more unusual than the children is their mother, whose devotion to their education raises the question, is it possible to turn children into geniuses by bringing them up in a special way? We invited Michael Deakin along to discuss this question with an educational psychologist, John Good. Michael Deakin began by explaining the methods the mother used.
Basically, it's a question of a prepared environment. Basically, what she did was she took her children and brought them up in an entirely isolated way. She went to the top of a Welsh hillside, and there she isolated herself almost entirely from what was going on outside. There was no radio, there was no television, there were no newspapers. There was only the barest necessities of life. And there she set about bringing up the children under what she called the process. Now, basically, the process was a matter of total permissiveness for the children, so that really nothing was barred. So that when I first went there, the child of 5 said to me, "What does naughty mean?" and simply didn't know what the word meant. A child who'd never, ever been forbidden anything. She also believed that educationally, and this is a separate matter, that there were unique moments in a child's upbringing and development when it had, as it were, sensitive periods. And during those sensitive periods, one had to be present in order to fill the unique need that the child had at that moment. She therefore devoted herself entirely to teaching the children, so that while they were awake, she was with them. She then slept 2 hours a night and did the housework, and then this repeated itself as a pattern. Now, the results were extremely surprising. At the age of 6, the eldest child was working with 5-figure logarithms. By the age of 11, he was well into his second year of university mathematics. The next child, who was 9, 8, was a concert pianist, already a very considerable achievement, who the best authorities believe will be a great pianist. The younger two were having achievements on the same kind of level at the same kind of age. Now, she said that this was not a matter of forcing the children, or indeed in any way producing a hothouse environment, an environment in which the children were able to develop happily, without either aggression or the pressures of the outside world, and that because they were happy, they had, as it were, become quicker, adapted to the learning process, and therefore had developed quicker and better. The results are certainly extraordinary, but the process was obviously a very difficult and painful process for everybody concerned in it.
Yes, I found that very interesting. I think a lot of what you say is true. I think it would be a mistake, though, to think that the parents have somehow made what you call a process, something which can be lifted out of this book and applied to other children. This would be quite wrong. And I think the great danger of this book is that other parents may be tempted to do so.
But if this mother was right, why is it therefore not applicable to other children? It seems to me that she has lit upon something which seems fundamentally to have worked, for one reason or another. Obviously, she was a person of extremely strong character and was able to make the practical dispositions necessary. But it would seem to me there are things there which other mothers might find useful.
Oh, indeed. A lot of the handling of the children is very civilized and is, in fact, in common practice in many intelligent families and in schools. But I think you say it works, but we don't know the basis from which it works. We do not know, for example, what the genetic basis is for these children. Undoubtedly is a very good one, as you say yourself in your book.
A good one, yes, but statistically the chances of having 4 children of this kind of IQ in one family is pretty remote. It seems at least likely that the environment of the process, as she calls it, has had some kind of effect on the children.
Undoubtedly, I wouldn't dispute this for a moment. Environment has a very great effect on children, and the greater effect it has depends on the genetic basis. Now, I know a directly comparable family who've been brought up in a normal environment, where in fact you have 3 boys and 1 girl of remarkably high intelligence. I would think comparable to these children. They don't show the same development at their present age as your children do, because they have not had such an intense and stimulating upbringing. But they have had a very good upbringing, and they are very remarkable children.
But you say an intense and stimulating upbringing, and that is indeed the words I would myself choose to describe it. But then you say you think it's dangerous. Why is this intense and stimulating?
I didn't say that I thought it was dangerous in itself. I said I thought it was dangerous that parents might conclude from this book that there is some process which they can lift out of it and apply to their children without understanding of what they're doing, and without the same sensitivity with which these parents have applied it. And of course it is very commonly found that with very bright children there's a tendency for them to race ahead on intellectual pursuits and to leave their emotional development behind. Now, I think this mother, with all respect to her, what she is trying to do, is in fact somewhat insensitive to what is really going on in these children. I think there is a great deal of aggression to be found in your account of these children's behaviour, which is not apparent to her. And I think there are occasions in which she is perhaps misunderstanding what is happening because she thinks of it only in intellectual terms.
The Children on the Hill by Michael Deacon is published by Andre Deutsch at £1.45. If you have strong feelings about children's upbringing, particularly about the use of discipline in the home, then please write to us at You and Yours, because next Tuesday we're running a special telephone programme in which some of those who've already written to us will be contacted to express their views live by telephone. And that's all for today. We'll be back tomorrow at our usual Friday time of 12:10.